New information on a story we've been following closely here on Happening Now. A federal judge just granted a request by the accused Charleston church shooter Dylann Roof to let his lawyers represent him in the guilt phase of his federal murder trial. Roof, as you know, is charged with killing 9 black parishioners at a South Carolina church last year. In July 2015, he was indicted and arraigned for the attack, which took place at the end of a Bible study. On November 17th, jury selection for his trial was delayed after a motion filed by the defense arguing Roof was not competent to stand trial. But on November 25th, the judge ruled he is, in fact, competent to stand trial, even finding Roof could represent himself as previously requested. Then, just yesterday, Roof filed a handwritten motion asking for his defense team to be allowed to represent him during the guilt phase only. Joining us now, Fox News anchor and attorney Gregg Jarrett. The guilt phase, that's what people know of as the trial, and that's what's coming up, right?
It is indeed. And, you know, this has happened before. It's not unusual that a defendant who demands to represent himself tends to vacillate, especially when he gets a taste of what it's like, as this guy has over the last week, to defend himself. And especially in heinous violent crimes, the people who commit those crimes tend to be mentally unstable, though they may be perfectly sane. In this case, this guy killed 9 people simply because of the color of their skin. It seems like such an irrational act, and so that's the challenge for the judge, is try to reason with an inherently unreasonable guy.
Well, and for the witnesses and the victims and the family members of the victims of this horrible event, it's probably going to be a welcome relief if he's not allowed to represent himself.
It is, because they'd be testifying, and were he to represent himself, we would see a situation in which he cross-examines his survivors and those family members. And, John, it always turns out to be just an absolutely ugly scene in which the defendant antagonizes the witnesses, alienates the jurors who decide his fate, and sometimes incriminates himself in the process. This is especially true with a guy like this who has confessed to his crimes, so it's hard to understand how any of what he would say on cross-examination would even be admissible. A judge would have to rein him in.
So if he does change lawyers during the guilt phase, if he, well, he has been representing himself up to this point, and changes lawyers, brings his defense team back on, does that in any way boost his chances to appeal a conviction?
Well, what it does is it changes his defense, and that would have an impact on an appeal. It looks like the defense attorneys wanted to present an insanity defense, that he suffered a mental disease or defect so severe he doesn't know right from wrong. It's an uphill climb here because of his confession, his flight, which is consciousness of guilt, his manifesto on his own website, which gave his motive for killing people because they were black. So the defense probably has a better shot than he does representing himself in the guilt phase.
Well, and a lot of people forget it, but he left 3 people alive from that Bible study and said, go spread the word about what I did here.
Yeah, and so those people will no doubt be testifying in the guilt phase, and so lawyers, you know, might just sit on their hands and not cross-examine them. It's interesting here, the judge today, or whenever he considers this motion by Dylann Roof, could say, you know, Mr. Roof, I can't decide now because the penalty phase is contingent on what happens in the guilt phase. So let your lawyers represent you for now, and depending upon how the guilt phase turns out, we'll revisit it for the penalty phase. That would be a clever argument.
Right, because he said he didn't want them, or he was only asking for the guilt phase, not for the penalty phase, wanted to represent himself.
Right, because he probably wants to represent himself to put forth his crazed agenda, white supremacy, and anger over race.
What a case. Gregg Jarrett, thank you.